Okay, so let me ask you something. You're Elizabeth Banks. You've been in blockbusters, you've directed, you've produced, you've built a career that most people in Hollywood would give everything for. And yet, everywhere you go, people walk up to you, look you dead in the eyes, and say completely unprompted, "That is mahogany." Not a quote from a major dramatic scene. Not a line from a tearjerker monologue. Just mahogany. A single word, delivered about a tablecloth. And here's the thing. Banks has talked about this publicly, and she's genuinely charmed by it. She finds it funny and a little surreal, the way only truly iconic cultural moments can be. Because what that moment represents isn't just a funny line from a sci-fi dystopian blockbuster. It represents something much deeper about how audiences connect with stories, what they actually remember, and why certain characters, even supporting ones, can completely own a franchise in ways nobody ever saw coming. So today we're digging into all of it. Effie Trinket, the mahogany line. Why Elizabeth Banks became so synonymous with a role that wasn't even the lead. And then we're going to pivot into Sunrise on the Reaping, the new prequel, and talk about what it means for the franchise, for the character, and for fans who have been holding on to Panem in their hearts for over a decade. Let's go. First, we have to actually talk about why that line works. Because on paper, it should not be the thing people remember. The Hunger Games is a story about children forced to kill each other on live television as a form of political control. It's about revolution, grief, loss, and the cost of survival. Jennifer Lawrence carries the weight of the entire world on her shoulders across 4 films. And yet, that is mahogany. The reason it works is because of Elizabeth Banks' commitment to Effie Trinket as a character. Effie isn't just comic relief. She's something far more layered than that, even if the humor is what catches your eye first. She's a woman so thoroughly conditioned by the Capitol's machinery that she experiences the horror of the Hunger Games as an inconvenience to her schedule. She doesn't react to Katniss's defiance with anger or fear. She reacts with concern about protocol, about appearances, about the tablecloth. That's dark. That's actually really, really dark. And Banks plays it perfectly by never winking at the audience. She doesn't let Effie know she's funny. Effie is dead serious. She genuinely cares about that mahogany table. That's the Capitol's rot-made flesh. A person so soaked in privilege and performance that they've lost the ability to register anything as real unless it's dressed in Capitol fashion. The comedy and the horror are the same thing. And that's sophisticated storytelling. Now think about fan behavior for a second, because there's a whole psychology behind why people latch on to lines like "that is mahogany" and carry them forward for years. It's partly about surprise. When you're watching something emotionally intense, and The Hunger Games is emotionally exhausting, a moment that's genuinely, unexpectedly funny lands with enormous force. It's like releasing a pressure valve, and your brain stamps it. It marks the moment as distinct, as memorable, as emotionally significant, even if the emotion is just relief and delight. But more than that, it's about what the quote does in real life. Fans use these lines as a kind of social shorthand. If you say "that is mahogany" to someone and they immediately get it, you've confirmed something, that you're both in the same club, that you both spend time in Panem, that you both love something together. Shared references are how fandoms maintain themselves across years, even decades. They're the inside jokes that bond communities. The truly wild part is that nobody planned for that to be the line. That's not the quote that was in the marketing. That's not the clip that played in the TV spots. It emerged organically from audiences watching the film and responding to something that felt real, not manufactured. And that's almost impossible to engineer deliberately. The moments that become legendary are usually the ones that weren't trying to be. Effie's fashion also deserves a real conversation here, because it's doing so much narrative work that it's easy to take for granted. Every wig, every impossible silhouette, every exaggerated color palette is telling you something about the Capitol without a single line of dialogue. Banks and the costume designers built a character that visually communicates an entire worldview. This is a society that has aestheticized oppression to the point where it's become art. The Capitol doesn't see the Hunger Games as murder. They see it as content. And Effie is their perfect ambassador because she believes in the aesthetic completely. That's why her eventual arc, especially in Mockingjay, hits so hard. When you see Effie stripped of her capital glamour, suddenly humanized, suddenly afraid. It works because Banks had spent 2 films building her as something almost inhuman. The crack in that armor is devastating precisely because it was so perfectly maintained. She earns the emotional moment. That's rare for a supporting character. That's the mark of an actor who took a role seriously when they didn't have to. Elizabeth Banks has had a genuinely remarkable career outside of Panem. She was in the Spider-Man trilogy. She was brilliant in Wet Hot American Summer. She directed Pitch Perfect 2 and Charlie's Angels. She's been in comedies, dramas, indie films, network television. She has range. She has credits. She has longevity in an industry that chews through talent constantly. And yet, Effie Trinket is probably the first thing most people think of when her name comes up. Why? Part of it is the scale. The Hunger Games was a global phenomenon at a cultural moment when YA adaptations were the biggest thing in Hollywood. These films reached people in their formative years, teenagers who were growing up alongside Katniss, who felt the rebellion in their bones, who wrote essays and fan fiction and stayed up too late debating every detail. When you reach people at that age with a character that powerful, the bond is permanent. But there's something else too. Effie is genuinely unique. In a franchise full of grim faces and revolutionary speeches, she was this singular burst of color, literally and figuratively. She stood out in every frame she was in. And Banks made choices with that character that were specific and strange and committed in a way that created something unforgettable. You can't replace Effie Trinket. You can't just recast that role with a generic performance and get the same result. Banks is Effie in the way that very few actors become their characters. That kind of role, the one that fuses with you permanently, is rarer than it looks. And it doesn't always land on the lead. Which brings us to Sunrise on the Reaping. This is the next major entry in the Hunger Games franchise, set during the 50th Hunger Games, also known as the Second Quarter Quell. And if you know your Hunger Games lore, you already know that this is one of the most historically significant moments in the entire mythology. This is the quell where twice as many tributes were reaped. This is the games that shaped Hamish Abernathy into the broken, brilliant, whiskey-soaked man we meet in the original trilogy. In other words, this is an origin story for one of the most complex characters in the franchise. And the decision to center a film on this particular moment is genuinely exciting from a narrative standpoint, because Hamish's story has always lived in the background, in fragments, in implications, in Woody Harrelson's wounded silences. Now we get to see a whole. Joseph Zada is stepping into the role of young Hamish, and that is not a small task. He's inheriting a character with deep emotional history and a very specific audience relationship. What's fascinating is that Hamish, in his own games, was a winner, which means this film gets to show us Hamish as someone who still had hope. Someone who was clever and young and fighting before the Capitol had fully broken him. That transition, from victor to survivor to the shattered man we know, is one of the most compelling arcs in the entire universe, and seeing its beginning should be extraordinary. And then there's Elle Fanning as young Effie. Okay, let's sit with that for a second, because this is where things get genuinely interesting for fans of the character. Young Effie during the 50th Hunger Games. She would be in her earlier years with the Capitol's machinery, possibly still being groomed, possibly newly placed as an escort, possibly not yet fully absorbed into the aesthetic performance that defines her later years. And that creates some genuinely compelling questions. When did Effie stop seeing tributes as people? Was there a specific games, a specific face, that she had to learn to look past in order to do her job? Or was she always the true believer, someone who bought into the Capitol's mythology so completely that she never needed to suppress anything because she never felt it in the first place? Here's a thought, and this is speculative, just a theory, but what if young Effie actually knew what she was doing? What if the early Effie was more self-aware than the later version, and the performance grew more elaborate as a kind of psychological armor? That would explain why the mahogany moment works so perfectly. By the time we meet her in the original trilogy, the performance has become so layered, so deeply inhabited, that even she can't see through it anymore. The costume became the person. That's a genuinely tragic reading of the character. And it's the kind of depth that a prequel film could unlock if it's willing to take the character seriously. Elle Fanning has the range for this. She's built a career on playing characters with hidden interiors, girls who present one face to the world and contain multitudes underneath. That quality makes her exactly right for a younger Effie who might still be in the process of constructing the mask we eventually inherit. The Hunger Games universe has always been at its best when it's doing character work. Not just world building, not just action set pieces, character. The reaping scene in the first film works because we know Prim. The cave scenes work because we believe Katniss and Peeta. The hijacking works because we understand what's at stake emotionally, not just politically. Every piece of plot functions because it's attached to a person we care about. Sunrise on the Reaping seems to understand this. It's not expanding the universe through new geography or new factions. It's expanding it through emotional history, through the people who already mattered to us in the moments that made them who they are. That's the most meaningful kind of expansion a franchise can do. And there's something wonderful about the fact that this whole conversation started with Elizabeth Banks talking about a line about a tablecloth. Because what that reveals is that the Hunger Games legacy isn't primarily about the plot, or the revolution, or even the love triangle. It's about characters. It's about Haymitch's hands shaking. It's about Effie's impossible wigs. It's about Cinna's quiet dignity and Caesar Flickerman's smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. These are the things fans held on to. These are the things that made a universe live. So when they announce a new film, and fans immediately start asking about Effie's arc, and theories start circulating about what young Haymitch was like before District 12 gutted him. That's not a tangent. That's the whole point. That's the engine. The franchise runs on character, and always has. That is mahogany. It's 4 words. It's about a piece of furniture. It tells you everything about a woman who has been so thoroughly colonized by a culture of performance and privilege that she cannot see the children dying around her. And it makes you laugh before it makes you think. And then you think about it later, maybe years later, and it doesn't feel funny anymore. It feels like indictment. That's what great character work does. It sneaks up on you. It arrives as comedy and leaves as something else entirely. Elizabeth Banks understood that. She built Effie Trinket from the inside out, and in doing so, she gave the franchise one of its most resonant and quietly devastating supporting characters. The fact that fans still walk up to her and say that line isn't just a fun anecdote. It's proof that she did something rare. She created a character who lived fully and completely in 4 words about a tablecloth. That's the bar. Sunrise on the Reaping has to clear it. And if the people making it understand what made this franchise matter in the first place, I genuinely believe they can. Panem et circenses. May the odds be ever in their favor.